Councillor Hawkins. Following that, I took the liberty of accepting the offer from Mr Winders, who's the Chief Executive of Port Otago, who sits before you, to come and talk about this issue and to answer questions. We won't be in a position to make any decisions because it's not on the agenda, but I thought that would be a helpful way to be as informed as possible, given that, as I understand it, the petition is directed at both the city and Port Otago. Does that raise an issue for anyone? Is everyone happy with proceeding in that way? Thank you. All right, well, the floor is yours, Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. And I guess for procedural clarity, I have to emphasise that this is something that's being presented by me, but not necessarily endorsed by me, although it's not a million miles removed from a similarly intentioned but differently worded resolution that was passed at the last meeting of the West Harbour Community Board. But the petition is to address port pollution, signed by 143 residents, and the petitioner's statement is that, quote, "We believe it is urgent that all parties involved meet to investigate installing shore-to-ship power brackets cold ironing in brackets at Port Otago due to the significant impact currently being experienced by Dunedin residents."
Thank you. Duly presented. Thank you. Kevin, would you like to come and sit at the table, please? And thank you for your offer to inform us about this issue. And if you're happy, we'll struggle with what we can with the presentation. I'm sure it's our technology, not yours. And you're happy, after we've had a look at what you've got to say, to take questions about the wider issue? Thank you very much. Would you push the middle button at the front of your microphone and drag it a bit closer to you?
Okay. Kia ora. If you just flick over a couple of slides. Oh, it's working. Great. So while we're here, if you look at the evolution of container ships, particularly over the years, they've been progressively getting bigger, which has meant that our infrastructure over time has had to adapt. And there's typically been a generational sort of adaptation. And the positive thing is the sixth generation ship you see there on the outside is literally becoming a bit defunct at the moment. So they were 14.5 metres depth was the sort of plan we had. And we're lucky now that the world's moved on a wee bit and the ships are getting slightly less deep and a wee bit wider. So if you go to the next slide. The reason all this changed was the Panama Canal. So you can see there the Panama Canal was designed to a certain width. So shipbuilders and container operators effectively built. They were called 4100s. We had them in the port from about 2000 to 2009. The old 4100s they were called. So if you go to the next slide, there's an example. That's a 4100. You can see it's quite long. They were at the time considered to be quite thumpy and noisy. So they typically would be 120 decibels and around about 63 hertz. So we had those through to about 2009, and then click to the next one. And then we got the L class. Now the L class was only 105 decibels, and the hertz was considerably higher. So the community in Port Chalmers were relieved that we'd gone away from the 4100s for a 10-year newer ship. They were about 105 decibels, so they're quieter. And we'd had that ship from about 2009 through to November last year. And we were all excited when the Rio came. So if you click to the next slide, there's the Rio that we all talk about. And you can just see it's a bit shorter, it's a lot fatter, and it sits higher out of the water. The beauty for Otago and Southland exporters is it holds about 5,300 containers, significantly larger numbers than the previous two ships. And it's got a significant number of reefer plugs, so that's just power for refrigerated containers. If you think what comes out of Otago and Southland, it's mainly fish, it's dairy, cheese, it's got meat and apples. So it's typically going through our port, all need refrigerated containers. So this vessel, when it was announced was coming, we were really excited. It's fuel efficient, lower emissions, it's a modern vessel, it's really great for our exporters. We were wrapped, there's 6 of them, so if you click to the next slide. So there's 6 of them, they're identical, they're 10 years old, they're 73,000 tonnes, they're big ships, and we were wrapped when they were coming. And the beauty there at the end there is it's 13.5 metres draft. So we've got a consent to deep into 15 metres, and effectively we are at 14, so we're able to stop dredging, which is really good for the environment. So that was really cool. And then they turned up and they're bloody noisy. So first one turned up, and it was a thump, thump, thump. So we thought it might have been just the first one was noisy, but all the subsequent 5 were the same sort of noise. So we started to, in February, obviously get complaints from our neighbourhood and wider afield. So we engaged, if you click to the next slide, the issue is that's the route the ships are taking. So you can see they come down from Singapore down to Brisbane, Sydney. So they're an import leg at that stage. They go into Tauranga. It's mainly all imports. And then they pick up a few exports. They go into Napier, pick up all the apples, go into Littleton, pick up meat, fish. Then they come to Port Chalmers. We load it up. That is the final port of call. So it's got a lot of refrigerated containers on. So it's the generation load at the port is significant, circa 13 megawatts of load. So while it's in port, generators are running, and that's what's making the noise. So if you go to the next slide. So what have we done? Well, in February we engaged noise consultants. We've got Marshall Day, the best in New Zealand. They worked on how we can mitigate it at port by shifting it around configurations. We worked out it was best on the multi-purpose wharf, bow out, the ventilation's closed, and one generator running. So that reduced the noise by about 3 decibels. So from 121 to 118, but it wasn't enough. It's the hertz that is causing the problem. It's like a V8 running in your driveway. It's a low rumbling thump. So it's not a very high pitched noise, it's a very background, low, constant thump. So we've worked through a change. We were getting it was coming in on the Sunday afternoon, so our neighbours were getting effectively Sunday night and Monday night, 2 nights we were disturbing them. So we worked with MERS to shift them to a Monday morning start to limit the damage to only the Monday night. That's costing Maersk about $40,000 US a week in additional fuel because they still have to meet their next port of call in Tanjung Palapas, and we've just taken a day off them, so they have to effectively put another knot of speed on that boat for 16 days. So it's about $40,000 US in fuel they burn every week to accommodate our neighbourhood, which is great, they're doing it. But importantly, we're trying to engage and solve the problem at source. And there's a project team formed in March. We've been working with Maersk in Copenhagen and in Hamburg. So if you click the next slide. So this is all the noise information we've got through our noise monitoring in Port Chalmers. And I won't bore you with all the data, but it's well under our limits. It's the hertz is the problem. So we're not breaching any limits, it's this low rumble. And you can just go to the next slide. So we've done measurements right through the harbour, all the areas we're getting complaints. So we've been around where people have complained and measured exactly where they are. And again, the levels are quite low. It's just the rumble, this low decibel, which is carrying. And particularly the wind has a real big impact on the weather conditions and how far that noise travels. Blowing a big southerly, we don't get any complaints. If it's still like we've had this lovely weather, the noise travels a long way. So we're getting that impact in the community, which we're not too happy about. So go to the next slide. That's where the problem's coming out. So you can see that it's funnel. We've got a generator running while it's in port. Those vents are allowing air into the engine room to cool. When it's cool, they can close them all. When it's hot, like our summer was, they have to keep them all open. So that's where the noise is actually emanating from. So if you go down to the next slide, that's what's causing the noise. That's a massive Hyundai generator. They've got 4 on the ship. When they first started coming here, we were running 2. We're down to running 1. So we're trying to mitigate it by running 1, but it's a massive engine with a big generator on it. The next slide, this is the issue. This is not a Toyota Corolla you can go down and fit a muffler to, and you can't go to Repco and buy a muffler. There's 6 individual ships made, they're the only 6 in the world. That left-hand photo is the exhaust coming out of the back of the generator, and the right-hand photo is the size of the silencer we want to fit into the ship. That will change the hertz from 63 and increase the hertz. It'll make it a higher pitch, but effectively that'll mitigate the noise. We're not trying to lower the decibel, we're trying to change the pitch. You can sort of see the scale of the bit of kit we're trying to fit, retrofit into 6 ships. They weigh about, it looks quite large, but it only weighs about 2 tonne. It's 1.5 metre diameter by 7 metres, and we have to retrofit it into the ship. So we're working with Maersk engineers at the moment to do that. So go to the next slide. So the key for me is to try and solve it at source with Maersk, and they've engaged very well. It's not a 5-minute fix. Project team, you think of a ship purpose-built, we have to arrange for it to go into dry dock. We have to get the engineers to sign off on it. You've got to get Lloyd's London to sign off on it. There's a number of sign-offs. Engine manufacturers have to sign on it. So we've got a bit of a rigmarole to go through to see if it's going to work. So the plan is to try one ship, fit the silencer, make sure that the hertz changed, and that should mitigate the noise for the community, and then do the other subsequent 5 ships. So that's the plan at the moment. You look at our obligations under the 2GP, we've got a noise contour regime. We're already doing the noise contours with the Rio in it, and that isn't actually the noise contours, but it'll be something like that. And as a result, the red line, we would then engage with those homeowners, and we would acoustically treat their houses if that's moved, up to 50% of the price of the house, or effectively purchase the property. We typically don't do that, but if they require it, we do. And then there's 2 steps below that where we go and acoustically treat. We've done that already throughout Port Chalmers. So when we've finished this work, which we expect to be in about a month's time, we'll get a new noise contour, we'll give it to our noise committee, and they would adopt that, and then we'd go talk to the homeowners on the basis that that's where the Rio's at the moment, with an ultimate decision to mitigate it at source and remove the problem. So that's where we are with the Rio. The question is, can we cold iron them? These ships are not capable of being cold ironed. If you look around the world at the moment and look at container ships, very few can be cold ironed. And there's very few ports that have cold ironing. We'd love to go to cold ironing as Port Otago. It'd be a big investment, but we wouldn't have any customers. So I don't think there's a single container ship going around the coast at the moment in New Zealand that can be plugged in, unfortunately. These are 10 years old. Probably the next generation will be able to be plugged in. Cruise ships, some of the cruise ships coming here might be able to be plugged in. Cruise ships that are in Alaska, in the fjord, in the sounds, fjords, can be plugged in. And there's quite a few ferries in the world that are electric and can be plugged in. But typically you won't see a container ship being plugged in. So what we're looking to do is mitigate the Rio's noise. And as technology gets better and better, we'll be able to adapt and put cold ironing in. But the good thing is, for those who are worried about emissions out of particularly cruise ships and container ships, come January 2020, they'll be on low sulphur fuel. Not because New Zealand's adopted it, it's because all the other countries in the world have adopted it. So they'll be bunkering offshore in Singapore or wherever they bunker, and they'll be getting low sulphur fuels. So while you might see steam coming out or emissions coming out of the stack, they're going to have very low particulates. So they'll be very good for the environment. So come January, we'll be in a better position. So that's about me. So questions?
Great. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you. First question from me, perhaps then. When all things being equal, would you anticipate the first trial ship will have its silencer fitted and you'll have an idea whether it works or not?
Yeah, we'd hope that'd be in the next 4 months. Okay. But this, again, it's going through all the rigmarole of getting sign-off through Maersk and their insurers and their engine manufacturers to ensure that it's not going to be a problem.
Well, thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Wonders, and thank you for the work thus far on this. I was surprised to find that I can hear it from where I live in Broad Bay, and I didn't see a dot there because I haven't complained. And what I'd suggest to you is that I am coming to a question. That some people hearing it, particularly across the other side of the harbour, might not connect it with this issue. So you may not, had you considered that, you may not know the full spread of the problem.
Well, I think we mightn't have a Broad Bay complaint, but we've had them at Waverley, Portobello, Harwood and Aramoana. I think Waverley's the closest we've got to town on that side.
Right. Yep.
And on the other side, the West Harbour side, we've had St Leonard's all the way through to effectively Carey's Bay.
And it's interesting about the different weather and the conditions. It's quite...
Yeah, well, and perversely, I pray for a big salary every weekend.
Indeed.
But,
so
yeah.
that leads me on to my next question around comms. What what comms, I know there's been some articles in the newspaper, but I would suggest to you that maybe there's a lot of people in the community who don't know all the work being done to this so far and what's going to happen next. What are your plans for that?
Well, yeah, we've been keeping the community involved, and we've got a Noise and Environment Committee that we tell them openly this information. But as far as the solution, we're still working with Maersk and we haven't got agreement for them to put it in because we don't know if it's going to work yet. So rather than talk about what possibly we're going to do, we'd like to be able to front up and say this is what we're doing when we've got a categorical answer. At the moment, I think they're well aware of the mitigants we've taken in respect of the berth positioning, shifting the window to mitigate it only to the Monday night and praying for, southerly.
Yeah, and I think you're right in terms of your close community. I wonder if you considered the idea that, the milestones in these sort of matters are certainly important, but it's the work being done in between time just to know the community, so the community knows, the wider community knows that you are working on it specifically. It might be something to consider.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Can I just ask, in relation to that, is this problem manifesting itself elsewhere? Or are the ships much more distant? Well, we know that there's a particular issue with the proximity here, but aside from the issue of the loading, the number of operating refrigerator containers and the load when they get here, is there a problem in any of the other ports?
Yeah, if you just want to flick back to that slide with the map on it, it's probably the easiest to explain it. But it's a good question. Just keep going up a bit, about probably 10. Keep going, sorry. Probably 9. There we are. So if you think of it coming down into Tauranga, it's an import call. So very few reefers. So it's only idling, and there I don't think Tauranga's getting many complaints, if any. When it comes into Napier, it's got a bigger load on. Apples get loaded. There's some complaints happening in Napier, but Littleton has started to get a number of complaints, and that's been raised with their city council. So they're in a similar position to Port Otago, but they're a bit later than us because I think the weather conditions were just slightly different. And then the weather's been quite settled, and they've definitely had complaints through Governor's Bay, Diamond Harbour and in Littleton itself.
Thank you. Further questions? Councillor Elder.
Chair. So you were talking about ways of mitigating it in the house. So what kind of things were you talking about, like the houses around the area?
Well, we acoustically treat them, so engineers come up and we'll acoustically treat the house. That's glass and walls. So there's quite a process we go through, and we've been doing that for a good 10 years, and I think we've spent about $3 million on houses in the last 10 years.
Triple glazing and insulation,
yes.
etc.
It's always different for every house.
Yes.
So it's a process they go through.
Councillor Hall.
Have they had any feedback from the engine manufacturers with muffling the engine, because that could cause major damage to the engines?
Yeah, well, that's one of the challenges you've got to work through, that they have to sign off that the silencer muffler is going to be effective and not damage it. And then there's the issue of fuel consumption as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say that'll be burning a lot more fuel.
Yeah, so we've just got to work our way through those steps.
Councillor Wilson.
Just checking on the unintended consequences of changing the hertz to a higher, I think that's what you said.
Yes, a higher hertz.
While that may make it much more comfortable for humans, and the unintended consequences of LED lighting on animals and other things, do we have any understanding of that?
We have a little bit of understanding, but not in depth.
Mm-hmm.
The hertz that we're going back to is around the same hertz that the previous L class was there for 10 years.
Okay.
So we didn't have any issues under that sort of regime. So that was very acceptable to the community. The target is to get back to the L class, perversely, with a 10-year newer ship.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Kevin, obviously the port gets a number of complaints over, and you've had them for the history of the port probably, but when you look at, and say, the last 6 months, or even the last 12 months, have the complaints been generally just around when this ship is in berth, or are you getting complaints around, 7 days a week type of thing?
No, I think we'd had, leading up to the 2GP, we had some complaints out of Carey's Bay in respect of containers being dropped and that bang noise in the middle of the night, which we've been tracking and made a lot of change around to mitigate that. But when the Rio turned up, November, December, the complaints started coming in January and February, and they're a significant number of complaints compared to what we had in the past, only regarding the Rio. We've had the odd occasion when, we've had another ship in that's probably been thought to be a Rio, and we've had some complaints around that, but typically it's just the Rio.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for coming in and informing us. I was just going to ask you that of the 5,200 containers or whatever, how many are getting loaded roughly into Dunedin? Is she 3/4 loaded by the time she gets here?
Yeah, it's about 80%
Yeah.
loaded by the time first of all, we take off all the empties that they want to provide us.
Yep.
And then typically this time of year, this week's exchange is about 1,600 containers off and on. So we're probably taking 800 off and putting 1,000 on.
So that's pretty much an average every week?
Yeah, we'll go into winter. Come August, it goes really quiet.
Yeah.
Following Fonterra's balance date, we're just about done. And the exchanges will shorten right up and the Rio won't be in town as long.
Yeah.
But in peak summer, when it's warm and we've got big exchanges, that's the longest time it's going to be in port.
Yeah. And on your longest month or your longest weeks, would you do what, 2,500 or not that much?
On that ship, or
Well,
no, typically
yeah,
about 2,000 is. The container guys don't like their ships in town more than sort of 36 hours
Yeah.
on rotation, so it's about 2,000.
Well, you'd have to be quick walking around the deck, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Councillor Gary.
Yes, just a subsequent question to that, just for clarity. So, am I to understand that approximately 4 months that it might take to get the muffler sorted and tested and sign it off and everything, in that time Rio won't be in?
No, the Rio will be in.
Oh, will be in during
Yes.
that time.
It's
Right. I
52 weeks
misunderstood
of the year,
you. 52 weeks. of the
coming
year.
in on a Monday morning.
Yeah.
And
But the weather conditions may ameliorate
come in.
things with a bit of luck.
yes, and it'll come in on Monday morning in August and possibly might get out by midnight
Yeah.
on the Monday. We typically it'd be like, it's due to go out today at 1:30. So it was in yesterday morning at 7 o'clock and it'll go out at 1:30. Well, in the winter it'll be a lot shorter.
Thank you.
Nothing further? Councillor Van Vis.
Got a couple of complaints on Facebook here just from last night. Someone claims that they've not been able to sleep since 2 a.m, someone else since 5:20. They note that the wind change at 8 seemed to make some difference. You said it's going to be a while before you're going to be able to do anything about this particularly thump noise. They talk here about the boom, boom, boom Rio ship noise. Can you give us a more accurate idea of how soon you're going to be able to make some real change to this level of noise?
No.
So you don't know if it's weeks or months?
Well, I've
We've already
explained
answered that question, Councillor.
I think it's going to be about 4 months we'll understand when all the experts have done their work and proved it'll work.
Right.
So that's the sort of time frame we're working on.
Okay, so
But-
that's 4 months, but then how long before you can actually get them into the ships?
No, that is to get one into the ship.
Oh, just to get
So
the one.
you'd trial one and make sure
Okay.
it works in one of the Rios. And once you've got it sorted, you'd then just rotate them around and retrofit it.
Right,
Would be so that'd be the plan. So it will take longer than 4 months.
sure.
Yeah.
And you're quite happy for us, for instance, to reply to people on Facebook that are making the complaints that it's being looked at, but these are the reasons it's going to be quite a few months.
Yeah,
yet.
happy. Direct them to me is the best thing.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. Thank you very much. That's very helpful, and I think we genuinely appreciate the efforts you're making to, at some expense to yourselves, no doubt, but more to the owner, to alleviate what is a new problem we've got to solve.
Yes.
And thanks. If it will be helpful too if you keep us in the loop about how that work is progressing.
Happy to.
Thanks for your time. Much appreciated.